Welcome to the Drummer Mindset Podcast. I'm Joel Pereira. I could call this one the Drummer's Drummer Mindset. I get to sit down with percussionist Tyler Householder. You can catch Tyler playing with Caitlin Krisko and The Broadcast on their Southeastern U.S. tour coming this November, 2023. You can also see him playing with a number of different musicians in and around Asheville. We cover some important details about the relationship between drummers and percussionists. We talk about the physiological differences between those that play drums with their hands versus those that use sticks. We also talk about the role and how we can work together to provide pocket and groove. We also talk about the importance of understanding the cultural roots of the instruments that we play. We also talk about not just the work-life balance, but also how to balance between two passions. So it was very insightful to hear from Tyler, and I hope you enjoy. And then after talking to Evan, and then Alan and River, I'd taken lessons from all of them.
Good, because I was going to say if you haven't talked to River.
I need to touch base with him because he's been in the process of building right now.
Yes.
So, but after talking to those guys, I was like, this is fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, this is what I got to do.
Yep.
I got to do some part of it. And it's just one of those things. It falls in line with my expertise, serving the music. And that's the goal here.
It ticks so many boxes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then also just learning a lot.
Well, and getting into the mindset and getting into like the mind body connection.
Totally.
Which is like big with any musician, but drummers especially, you know?
Agreed.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, yeah. And so, that's at least one of the threads that comes out through every conversation that we have.
For sure. That's what I'm, excited to see where it goes,
And I think there's something too, and one of the books that I encourage folks to check out is The Body Keeps the Score. It's about trauma therapy basically, right? But when we check in with ourselves, like sometimes we have a traumatic event, we don't even realize it because we're so harried just with daily life.
Yeah.
And then we also deal with these pains, belly aches, back pain, muscle tension, whatever it is. We don't know what it's from. We just throw it away as stress.
Right.
We all know that that's a big part of it. But a lot of times it can come from it could just be the physical stress, or it could be something deeper. Because life's hard. And so sometimes if we don't take recognition of that, but I think that as drummers, like you hit the drums, but the drums sometimes hit back, right?
Yep. And
so sometimes you can start to feel this way or that, and it affects the way you play, and it affects what you can do. And sometimes you push through it, and it can be really rewarding and therapeutic, and then sometimes it can just be a chronic issue that keeps going. So that's one of the things, that's not my goal to uncover trauma in the podcast.
Sure.
This is not therapy, right?
Right.
I'm not practicing at this point. That's not my goal. I mean, who knows? I may in the future again, but
that's not the why.
It's if a listener can hear it and understand it and maybe identify. And so a lot of what I'm aiming to do is talk about things that people are comfortable talking about, that they feel well healed from, that they want to talk about.
Right.
Then that's great. But otherwise, I don't want folks leaving here feeling raw,
right,
and not ready for the day,
right.
And also, it's not, if it's just unclosed or we don't have that arc, then it's still not even necessarily helpful for anyone else, unless people just, some folks do want to kind of see whatever controversy or whatever, and that's not what this is about.
Sure, no.
So, but yeah. So yeah, and so far it's just been just dropped my 10th episode today, and every time it just feels like that hit something.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah. A drummer podcast seems so limited, but when you add the mindset to it, it actually opens up so many levels.
Yeah. For sure. And I really got to think and studies have shown that the neurology is different. There's almost no other instrument that when taken under MRI, functional MRI, that lights up the brain in as many different areas as drumming does.
Doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's some, and then we also know, like with dementia and those kinds of things, like music plays an important role in therapy for it. And what I'm not talking about cure, I'm just talking about how we manage it and how we can find a moment of peace in those times. Like, I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I've always known that music is a tool in my tool belt that I need to use to be to be myself.
Yeah.
But it's only more recently where I can actually say that music is medicine.
Yeah.
You know?
For sure.
And not just limited to drums, but to me, that's where it should always start, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, tell me, like, about your first time exploring drums.
Well, I started pretty young. I was always, you know, a tapper, always needing to move my body, and, you know, was very athletic as well. So,
Okay.
And that's like a common thread too, is like I view drumming as somewhat of a sport.
Sure.
And have always kind of focused on training my body and mind to be capable of doing this for a long time, because it's so important to me.
So what does that mean? Like, technical aspect, like to think about doing it for a long time?
Well, to me, it's doing a lot of work off the drum.
Okay.
And doing like opposite work.
Like cross training?
Yeah, like where you're hitting a lot,
Mm-hmm.
actually focusing on the muscles that pull rather than push, because that's what, you know, it's that opposite reaction, and it's this bouncing. And so, like dribbling a basketball, it's not just about pushing the ball down, it's about receiving the ball. And dribbling fast isn't about slamming the ball hard. It's actually about using those fast twitch muscles,
Right.
which don't necessarily get trained when you're on the drum or you know, working with sticks and stuff. And we're kind of like, you asked about like how it started, and this isn't really how it started, but it's where it's gotten, where I've realized that some of the stuff I did early on with sticks doesn't actually help with hand percussion.
Okay.
And so, yeah, like when you play with sticks, you want real soft hands.
Right.
But when you're playing with your hand as the implement, you want really rough. And it's not just the calluses, it's the like, it's everything. It's the bones, it's the circulation, it's everything underneath the skin as well as the skin.
Yeah.
That needs to get trained as well. And if you have rough percussion hands, it's not great for playing with sticks. And, you know, a lot of drummers I meet, you shake their hand, they have like the smoothest hand, and you might not think that, but that is the case. And like you need a soft, not just the skin again, but like you need soft hands with sticks. Whereas with percussion, like if you look at my hand, it's almost flat.
Okay.
Because those calluses.
Can I see your hand?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
You see where like.
Yeah.
Where all those, you know, joints and all those little
Can you turn it towards
yeah, where all those
Sorry.
divots are, they've filled in over time.
Interesting.
And it's not something you can just, you know, I want to play percussion and have that.
When did you
it's
start
something
to notice
that builds over years. I mean, it's been a long time. And like I'm not consciously working on that.
Right.
But it's, you know, it's interesting watching like an older African drummer playing djembe. They're hitting with less power and force. They're hitting like to get like there's like so many different tones and microtones that you can get out of the hand.
Yeah.
But you can't really tell they're like when you're starting out, you have to really exaggerate the bass tone slap and then all the other tones in between.
Okay.
When you watch them play, they're not changing their hand too much.
Right.
But it's a lot of it has to do with just the physical nature of the hand.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense as you describe it, and I've never thought about that before. I mean, I've played percussion before, like growing up, and like played percussion in concert bands.
Yep.
Obviously, snare, right? Bells, mallets, all still a part of it. And then I switched over to percussion in the jazz band at Georgia Southern, literally for like maybe a semester. Total distraction. Couldn't keep up with it. Quit. But I was definitely doing more congas and things like that. And then the band I had outside of school, we had a percussionist. And so sometimes I would like play around on his setup. And because I love percussion.
Sure.
But yeah, when I've been so baffled at looking some of the guys that you're talking about, these African drummers that grow up doing it and do it into old age. And it does look like just something that I'm missing.
Yeah.
Because for me to get that sound requires contortion.
Correct.
Or cupping or something.
And tension and all these things that don't allow you actually to do it for a long amount of time.
Right.
Consecutively and then over the years.
Yeah.
You know?
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, I don't know, the image I had immediately when you were describing, players that use sticks. It's like, it's your hands are another joint now, like into this extension of your arm. And so, you need to play soft because you need to let the stick do the work that it can do.
Right.
Whereas like you're going up a joint at least.
Right.
However that works. I don't know.
Yep.
And so then you've got to learn. That's interesting. So now I'm just imagining like if I had a stick that was just an extension, and if I could feel the end of the stick, what that would be like for my drumming. Mm-hmm.
I think jazz drummers spend so much time thinking about that.
Yeah.
And it's not always just like the physiology of playing, but also the different sounds and different tones that you can get out of a drum. And you watch a good jazz drummer and there's a sensitivity. And they're more than any other drummer, they're very particular about the tips of their sticks. For
sure. Yeah. And also the way you talk too about kind of the kind of cross training or however you like to think about it too. But that because I took some lessons from River Gregarian, who's like does it all right. And when he's talking about using the stick, he is talking about pulling the sound out and not like beating it out of the drum, but like pulling it out. So it is like kind of in line with what you're saying about focusing on that bounce a little bit. Yeah,
and you watch even like some of the best drummers, like drum set players or people that are used to playing more with sticks, when they go to play a hand drum, they're acting like their hand's a stick, and it's not,
right.
And it's really like, for me, I want to touch it the least amount of time, the drum, the least amount that I can.
Okay.
And really pull it out.
And,
and really, that's what's activating that skin vibration, but also giving the tone that otherwise sounds very flat.
Yes. Yeah. And again, this comes up in like jazz drumming, like the closest thing I can think is like whether you bury the beater or not in the bass drum, right?
And again, like with that, there's always the opposite, and there's sometimes where you do want to press and mute and use the hand differently than just pulling the sound out. But to get good tone, it comes from that pulling the sound out and not always burying it.
I love it. That's cool. Okay, so you play percussion of all sorts because you also play the drum set, right? So was there some point that it was a decision made for like what you do professionally, or maybe
I mean, so I feel like I've lived multiple musical lives. And so maybe going through that, like, because it's been an evolution there. I can't point to like a specific time where it was like, I'm not a drummer, I'm a percussionist. I guess I've always considered myself a percussionist in the fuller sense.
Right.
And so not limiting myself even to just hand drums.
Right.
Though those are my favorite percussive instruments to play. So it started before, but really like the switch in my mind happened when I went to a performing arts high school.
Okay.
In Charlotte.
Okay.
The School of the Arts, and auditioned for the jazz band, not having played kit before, but I spent that whole summer before I set up boxes.
Okay.
And would play with brushes and like old brushes and old sticks from my uncle.
Okay.
And would play on this cardboard kit 2 records. And my first time playing a real kit was my audition for jazz band. And they like put me in, and I remember playing behind the kit, like a real kit for the first time, and just being like, oh, this feels so good. You know?
That is awesome. I've not heard that kind of story before. It's like your first tryout.
Yeah.
You went from cardboard to drums.
Yeah, and I had played like snare drum and concert band, and I had done hand drum stuff before, but this was like the beginning of like kind of a formal education. So it's 4 years there, and all state jazz band. Really
on the kit,
competitive. But how it worked is like, I mean, we had 3 drummers, we'd cycle in and out, and when I came in, I was the youngest, and then as you age, you become the elder, and there's like this new breed coming up, and they were incredible musicians and still doing really amazing stuff. And so we'd all give, and I would love to give space to the younger guys and learn through the way they play.
Yeah.
And so we had a set of congas there, and that's where I really started getting into playing congas themselves. And through playing that, ended up loving that more than even playing kit.
Okay.
And so there's times where I'd choose to play percussion.
Okay. Nice.
Even there. And then as that's happening, as this formal training's happening, there's an informal training of, my mom is a massage therapist.
Okay.
And was working on a number of musicians, always a deep music appreciator. And taught me that there's 2 sides of it. There's the musician playing, and then there's the listener.
Wow.
And that relationship is 50-50. It's not 90-10.
Right.
And so that was a deep lesson, and so she would trade massages to let the bouncer let me into a club and watch some of these like really amazing musicians up close and personal on the side of the stage. And that's where I really like learned even more than I would have in school,
Absolutely. So your mom, being a massage therapist, would work with musicians.
Yeah.
And learned just like kind of what goes into it from that concept. Like there's a push and a pull, or a give and a take that happens.
Well, yeah, a lot of them were older cats, and like their bodies were not keeping up with where they were in their mind.
Totally.
And you could see that deterioration, but at the same time, you could see the number of years that they played. Like it got easier for them,
Right.
And they would. It was less work than it probably used to be,
But then also knowing too, like going and watching and listening in the way that I've been doing over the past like several months now, it's been different than the way I've ever gone to listen before. Like I've often thought that I was like a person that would live with or listen with my head, just as like identifying as a musician for a long period of time, and then being able to go and enjoy music and often like hold up the wall leaning, just kind of like listening. How are they doing that, right? But now I do it in a different way, like because I'm watching not just the drummer, I'm watching everyone, and I'm paying attention to their faces and seeing how they're communicating with each other, right? But I kind of tangentially, I want to bring it back around to like you as a high schooler, for you to be able to watch these musicians play live. You're athletic and you're watching and you're learning by watching, right? Like that ability is something that fascinates me too, right?
Totally, like active or participatory listening.
Right.
And I think as a musician now, I can pick those people out of the crowd that are actually giving me energy. And that's how I think about it too. Like a good gig for me is where I've given all the energy that I can in that moment, but I've also been reciprocated and received energy. And it doesn't take a lot of people either. It could be one person. But there's those people that maybe you're seeing it, but you're also just feeling their participation in that moment.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah. And you play, let's see. Well, I definitely want to get into like kind of your current projects too, but I also want to make sure that we don't miss anything with this timeline. So it was like it was through high school. So you were already doing some concert stuff.
So yeah, with the jazz band at the School of the Arts, we were gigging. We were getting pulled out of class to go gig for like city events and different things like that.
Yeah.
And then at the same time was, out at these, late night gigs, seeing the older cats play, and going there enough, eventually one of them gave me my first paid gig. His name is Charles Harrison.
Okay.
And he's like this old soul singer. He had a bunch of tricks, but he would pull the mic away and sing just a cappella and be louder than with the mic. And he had this voice that was just like butter and would like melt you. So I did a few gigs with him as a trio, guitars, and then I was playing hand percussion, and him singing. Okay. And then, so that was like my first gigs, and then was also starting some bands with some of the other kids from my school. So we were gigging like 14, 15 years old. Moms would drop us off like around the block, so nobody saw us, that we weren't driving, and we carry all of our equipment a little further just to keep that distance. Yeah. But anyway, fast forward, graduate high school, went to New York City. And I purposely chose not to go to a music school because I had done that. Yeah. And that's a recurring thing in my life where like music's has to be fun, and it's my thing that like is my release. Yeah. And so despite being a professional musician, I try to not make it my primary source of income. So that there's not that stress of it being about money,
It sounds very wise.
Well, so
like, how'd you come to that?
I have other interests. And so I chose to go to school for architecture. And there's always been, these two sides of me, this math, different level of thinking, and then also the rhythm, the music side of things. Right. But to me, they're almost inseparable, and I need them both in my life. And one helps the other. Yeah. And so at different stages of life, one's taken more of a primary role, and the secondary's kind of gone a little behind, but I've got to, it's all about finding that balance, and I never want to get that balance too far one way or the other. So went to school for architecture, 5-year program in New York City, was gigging the whole time I was there. I brought my kit, I brought all my hand drums. Okay. But that
where were you living?
So I was in Brooklyn. Okay. Had a fantastic group of artists that we lived with.
Did you have like a group practice space or something?
We did. We
Okay.
had like a big loft space with like a bunch of instruments that were always out.
That you shared with other musicians as well, or just in the band? Okay, cool.
Yeah. And at that time, I had a good friend of mine. He was a French foreign exchange student in my high school, but he moved up to New York with me.
Cool.
And was a guitar player, singer. So we were doing the like coffee house scene in New York, New Yorican spot in Manhattan, a few spots in Brooklyn, and we were like starting to to get some footing there. We met a reggae band, Judah Tribe, Rhythm Nation was actually the first band, and that morphed into Judah Tribe. And so I was like the token white guy in this all Haitian reggae band. Yeah. For a number of years. And
how was that?
That was like amazing. That experience was very formative and like opened my eyes up to like world music in a way. And at the same time I was like satisfying that other part of my brain and reading about percussion and drumming. Yeah. There's a book by Mickey Hart, Drumming on the Edge of Magic.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it yet, but yeah.
And then there are a couple other like ethnomusicologists, like African rhythm and sensibility. And so I was like, at the same time where I was exploring musically this different kind of music, I was also reading about other cultures. And it's something that I've always been conscious about too, like coming from, the South and being a white guy, not being conscious of the fact that I don't ever want to, take from a musical history without trying to understand it deeply. Totally. Yeah. And so I was participating in it, on a daily basis, but I was also trying to read and like get to a deeper level of understanding about where these rhythms that felt natural to me, where they came from. Yeah.
I love that you were thinking about those things then, Yeah. Yeah. It's, I think it's easy. We have very similar, like there's a lot of parallels that are going on in a lot of ways. So I went to a fine art school as well. And then, kind of found the drum set. Like I was doing trumpet and some other things, and then also looking at the drums, and I was like, I want to play that drum set. And so I got into concert band to start practicing that fashion. They wouldn't let anyone touch the drums unless they knew what they were doing, kind of a thing. And finally, I finally got my drum set, and then they let me start to play, and then started trying out for the band and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, not really realizing what was going on. I think the biggest, formative thing for me was like learning some Latin grooves on the drums and just being like blown away with that in a counting differently, and thinking about things differently, but not really understanding the roots of where that comes from for a long time. Right. Until then I went to college and then like changed my major a bunch of times, but anthropology was one of my majors for a long time. It ended up being my minor, right? And then really just kind of delving in that way and have like starting to gain this respect for like where so much of this American music really comes from. Right. And then I was like my mind was kind of blown, And so it's been funny because lately I've been thinking about it more like, I was always a fan of like hip hop, blues and jazz and everything, but not really understanding where that stuff was coming from. And I've talked about this before, but really how like, when you're playing the drum set, it's an innovation that hasn't been around that long. And it's essentially taken the job of like 5 or 6 people down to one person. And so it's always been a community thing when you play the drums. And especially like this West African perspective, right? Yep. And where polyrhythms come from. And it comes from the idea that really like you've got a lot, like it's a community of people lending their sound to music together. Yep. And that's where it comes from. And so to understand, like, in a spiritual aspect, but also a technical aspect, like what your role is now, like, you have to pay some homage to that and realize it's freaking hard.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason it's hard, is because you are trying to channel that, and it's, you got to pay homage to that for the source of, like, where it comes from, I think.
Yeah, I had an early experience going to a concert of Babatundi Olatunji.
Okay.
He's like one of the, people that's really brought the djembe and African drums into more of the mainstream. He played on a lot of records. He's kind of the first one to, like, kind of bring it into the Western culture. Obviously, he's not the only. There's a lot of others, but that was, like, my introduction to it, and it was such a memorable experience to me. I've always held on to that. But it's also inspired me to dig deeper. And, one of the things I did when I was living in New York is, like, I just stumbled into this West African dance group, Bambara, and started playing for the dance classes, and just kind of, giving of service, but also learning a lot about these ancient rhythms through practice. And that also is what, like, I would say built up my hands. Like, we would play for like 3, 4, 5 hours at a time.
Wow.
And, like, really active, and then also
were these, like, formal for the dancers? It was kind of like they were trying to do specific things, and so there would be repetition or like a lot of playing, stopping, like refiguring, whatever.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, there's different styles, depending on the different regionality, even within West Africa, but there is a common language there, and there's this link between the drums and dance and community, like you said, and that's where I really learned about it directly for the first time. And New York's like that, it's, and that wasn't the only one. There was also, like, these, like, Latin groups that I would start to connect with and start really exploring that, like, Afro-Cuban.
Yeah.
But seeing how music's, that tree of music's all come from Africa and come from the djembe. And for me, percussion's such a wide field, and there's so many different instruments, but the djembe to me is, like, the root, and it's my favorite drum to play. And a lot of it comes from New York for me. And so while we're in New York, I did want to touch on, like, I was part of this reggae band, and it was I think 2006, I think.
Okay.
One of the guys, an older gentleman with the guitar player Les, his daughter was about to get married, and the night before the wedding, the groom, Sean Bell, was shot by the cops 50 times. Coming out of a club, they pleaded mistaken identity, but literally 50 bullets in his body. And so our band was kind of thrown into, and this is before
George Floyd.
Yeah. I mean, and we all know that it didn't start with George Floyd.
Right.
But it was, like, my first, like, direct experience with protest music. And so our band, because there was that link there with the father of the bride, we got pulled into a series of events around that time of, in response and to support the family. And so, like, Reverend Al Sharpton organized this event at the Brooklyn Museum. We played, and I remember that to me is, like, one of the most memorable gigs I've ever played.
Yeah.
Because there was a police presence there as well, and then, like, halfway through our set, the power got turned off. And what was cool, it was the first time of me taking a leadership role in the band, because I had one of the only instruments that wasn't plugged in. And so I just kept playing. And so then the other guys started picking up drums, and we just started playing drums. And despite it, not being the loudest, that was like the climax of the night.
Wow. And
within I think we were playing for about 10 minutes, the power got turned back on, and we went right back into this song. And it's a song called 50 Shots. And it's to pay homage to Sean Bell. And that was just such a crazy time in my life, but also really something that stuck with me.
Yeah.
And so, as a white guy being part of this community, it opened my mind, opened my heart to things I hadn't experienced before.
Wow. Yeah, just kind of the heart of it all. I've been exploring this idea that someone else gave me about the idea of folk music, and really it's all folk music, and to come to that in that way, and to not to mention just the atrocity and the tragedy, but then to come together to try to support and bring minds to it, to then finding a little bit more adversity and power being cut or however that went down, and pushing through that anyway. That persistence of the message is there, we're here together, and this is where music's at.
Yeah, and music can't solve the problem, but man, it was a big part of the family and the community healing.
Right.
And this idea of music as medicine.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's direct for the musician, but sometimes it's way bigger than all of us.
Yeah.
Wow. So anyway, that was a big experience, and not to jump out of that, but it also made me realize how short this life is, and how important it is to follow your passions and to do things that matter.
Yeah.
And so about that time, I had also met the band that I'm in now, and have been for a number of years, and that's Caitlin Krisko The Broadcast.
Yeah. I got to see y'all at AVL Fest.
Yeah,
man, it's a powerhouse.
Yeah,
yeah. It's so that band is based out of New York, or at least started there. So or how did that go?
The first iteration of it started there.
Okay.
We decided to move to Asheville about 2010.
Okay.
And just in my life, it was good timing. Some things in my personal life had come to an end, and was looking for a fresh beginning. We somewhat randomly chose Asheville, but mainly because of its geographic location. We were doing a lot of touring at the time. And it's so centrally located. We knew it was a great music town. And then, as soon as we got here, there were a few musicians here in town that our drummer, Michael Davis, knew from school, and one of those being Jacob Rodriguez. And so I remember our first night in Asheville, it was a Laugh Festival. And so we had seen a number of bands that day, and then Jacob took us out that night to hear an organ trio over at the Get Down in West Asheville. And it was Michael Libramento's organ trio. And if you don't know Michael, he's a multi-instrumentalist, great drummer, in addition to guitar, bass, keys. And, it was kind of the who's who of Asheville musicians in 2010 that were all there. And so just getting introduced to everybody, that was our entree into this scene. And I fell in love with Asheville, and have been here ever since.
Nice. And you grew up in Charlotte, though, right?
Yeah.
But so not really on your radar.
Right. I used to come up here, but it was that was back when it was boarded up.
Right.
It was a different place. And then I've been kind of a ping pong ball between the North and the South. Like born in Jersey, raised in Charlotte.
Got it. Okay.
Went to New York for 10 years, and then I've been back here since 2010.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Once we moved here, we were on the road, and that was the peak of my touring. Mm-hmm. Up to like 200 shows a year away from home more than
and had you been working as an architect during that time already, or what was that like?
I quit architecture when I moved down here.
Okay.
And took a nice little break from that to pursue music full time.
Okay.
I never could, like I said before, I could never get rid of one. I always need the two things to balance out. So I did start my own woodworking business and was doing like a design build thing.
Nice.
And so I've always had that, balance.
It's important to have that balance.
Totally.
Like we sometimes talk about identity and what it means. And when everything is drumming, man, those hits come hard.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually that's been very poignant and on my mind lately. The pandemic caused a big shift in music, and that's when started to kind of reevaluate things. Also, the birth of our first child,
right,
with 2 boys, and that changed the calculus of about how much I could be away.
Yeah.
But trying to still trying to find that balance,
Yeah.
And it's
because you and your partner are both like musicians.
We are, yeah.
Productive musicians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Molly Rose Reed. She has a band, Underhill Rose. Met in Warren Wilson and have been kind of part of the music scene for a while here.
Yeah.
But when we first got together, we were both touring. And
was that before you moved to Asheville?
No, that was that was since. Yeah.
Okay.
And we actually met through African drumming. So when I moved here, I quickly plugged in with Adama Dembele.
Okay.
He's he's our local African elder statesman.
Okay.
He's from Mali, Ivory Coast, a 33rd generation djembe player.
Okay. Has he done some things with like Free Planet Radio or River Gregarian?
Yes, he's done some stuff with them. And then we had a group, Les Amis, with some of the members of Tubob Crew. I think if the story is correct, Tubob actually went over and stayed with Adama's family.
Okay.
When they, the first few times they went to Africa.
Okay, cool.
And so that was part of the reason Adama ended up coming to Asheville.
Okay.
And so I met him early on, I think one of the first few days I was here in town, and immediately latched on with him and started doing West African dance classes here. And then he's just an encyclopedia and very open book. And so he taught me so much, and I really appreciate him deeply. Him and also River Gregarian. River's a well of information.
Yeah.
Different types of percussion than are my kind of roots, but that's what I love about percussion is it's such a wide, vast subject matter that you really can, no matter where you go in the world, find something new to learn about.
Absolutely. So now you got a foot more sturdy or more solidly in architecture, it sounds like. Definitely in family.
Yeah.
But I still see you out playing.
Oh yeah.
Are you touring at all right now?
Yeah, I've pulled back a little bit on the touring side, just to find that balance. But still doing what I can, and then really focused on the local regional gigs at the moment. Been doing some stuff with Jay Sanders, Zach Page, Steve Alford.
Those
and Evan Martin.
Yeah.
We have this group called Sinfonietta.
Okay.
So we're releasing a vinyl here.
Nice.
In the next month or so.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Have you all been playing out?
Yeah, we did. We did a residency for about a year and a half. It kind of culminated with the record, and we're gonna bring it back and do some live stuff once the record comes out
at Jay's place. You think? Little Jimbo?
Yeah, we might do some stuff there. I'm not quite sure yet exactly where we're going to.
Yeah, I caught you there with Rom Squad and
Justin Ray.
Yeah, that sound was amazing.
That's another thing about percussion is that it's allowed me to play with such a variety of musicians and drummers.
Yeah.
And I really love that interaction with drummers.
Yeah. I want to hear more about this.
Yeah.
And I'll just kind of give you some background on where my interest is. Yeah. Obviously, like I said before, like I did some percussion. I would still consider myself to be more of a dilettante in the percussion world, right? Mm-hmm. Like I appreciate it and I like to mess around with it some, but don't really understand all the ins and outs. And then I had a jazz drum teacher. I came back from college and I was just picking up a lesson while I was visiting. And I was like, all right, so we've got a percussionist in the band. And he like turned to me. He's like, I'm sorry, man. I was like, oh no, what? And so I might have picked up some prejudgment just from his perspective on that stuff. But he still kind of gave me an idea about how to best have that interaction with percussionists and stuff, but still like kind of picked up on that a little bit. And then, so then also just found too, like, I was like, I got rigid, fixed mindset. Mm-hmm. I was like, you shouldn't play timbales. I got the snare drum. Like, you should lay off of all the stuff that's just like overpowering the groove, you know, and just not, and much to his credit, like that percussion, he has continued to play and he has become phenomenal in congas, and I'm sure other percussion too, but I primarily see him on congas and stuff. But yeah, so I just like picked up this prejudgment pretty immediately, and then it's taken some time, but I've like pulled back, and some of it was just like recognizing that community aspect and like how exciting is that? Like you have, a brother or sister there, like in a similar force, like kind of sharing that space and feeding off of each other, Yeah,
it's funny. Like I used to be a little more sensitive to like the idea that like percussion is secondary to the drummer, and only there to support the drummer. And that being said, I've actually come around to like appreciating that aspect of percussion. Okay. And like, the bad rap that some percussionists get, like a lot of times that's like, it's this idea of like, oh, a percussionist is a failed drummer, or also this idea with drummers that like, oh, I can just pick up a conga and I'll, I can play any kind of drum. Right. And yes, like to me, drums are for everybody. Right. But at the same time, like when you're in that relationship between the drummer and a percussionist, is sacred. And it's much like a bass player and a drummer. Yeah. The difference being is that, like, to me, the percussionist role is to play off of the drummer. Okay. Yeah. There are times where the percussionist can take that those roles can flip. Yeah. But especially for songs, like to me, it's always about the song. Sure. And about framing and being part of that groove and that underlying, I like to say like we're making a bed for you to lay on. Yeah. And like I want to be part of the pocket, and though I'm working, off of the drums, I still want it to be about the groove. Like I'm not playing a different groove over your groove, I'm playing with you. Right. And so finding that parallel structure, or that way to be symbiotic, and an extension of the drummer. Yeah. As a percussionist, I always wish I had like 3 or 4 more arms, Sure. But if you can think that you're the 3rd and 4th arms of the drummer, there's something there,
Yeah, I'm tripping out right now as you talk about it. I'm just thinking like, okay, how's this? It seems so clear to me, but I'm just going to ask the question too. Like, what is like, how does this mindset serve your design in architecture or in woodworking?
Yeah, I've often looked for parallels there, and I think there are. I don't think they're so explicit, But the things they have in common are pattern recognition, spatial awareness, and so I do try to let them inform each other.
Right.
And the point at which I am now in my music career, like it's about finding those moments of freedom and exploration and innovation that I really grasp onto, and so I try to bring that mindset into architecture.
Yeah.
That idea of finding the edge and like playing with it.
Yeah.
That's kind of where that crossover is, but I do find a lot of concepts that I'm able to incorporate into music from architecture as well. And some of those are sonic, some of those are like more literal to like a rhythm and a pattern.
Yeah.
But that stuff fascinates me. Also, like, if we could just go a little deeper, to me, rhythm is like one of the fundamental elements of nature, of the universe. If you get super granular down to like, quantum physics, the smallest thing they can find is like a vibrating string.
Right.
Then, zooming way out and seeing the universe in itself, and there's a rhythm there being expressed. Even the earth has a rhythm. Our bodies, are drums. Our bodies are drums. We have a heart that beats and a body that is built to echo that and spread that rhythm through our whole being.
Totally.
And so I think that, as drummers, as percussionists, we're holders and keepers of not just time, but also of like the very existence, our very experience of the universe.
Yeah.
And there's a lot where even if you were completely quiet, even if you were in a, sensory deprivation chamber, you would still hear the rhythm of your heart and the rhythm of your body. And so that's really deeply affected me in my playing, where I want to tap into things that are there already.
Yeah.
And that exploration's not necessarily inventing anything new.
Okay.
It's uncovering what's already there. And so I'm not a songwriter yet. I haven't explored that side of music very deeply, but so I don't typically start from like a blank slate. To me, there's always something there that I'm responding to and that I'm reacting and helping to try to balance out. And so I think of my role in a band, just like in my family and just like in life, as trying to be a balancer, trying to be someone that finds that place of balance that just feels really good.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think, I don't know, like I was just thinking about too, some writers that you talk to as well that have a similar perspective, they also talk about getting out of the way of that inspiration, and just being the messenger. Like they're writing, and sometimes like they don't even know. I think it was Bob Dylan, and from what I've heard about like different interviews and things like that, but he said like he couldn't write those things again. Right. And like, in those moments, like it was not him. He doesn't take full ownership over what he was doing, as that folk artist, that messenger, right? Yeah. Like it was all just kind of, he found something in some way to kind of like reflect what was going on, that people could hear. And it's much like what you're talking about with percussion. It's just like a reflection or a resonance with everything else that's going on anyway, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And over time, your ability to react, those seconds that it takes turn into milliseconds. And that's the exciting part of music for me right now is, you know, I used to try to recreate the same performance or like level of performance at each time I was playing out. But now it's trying to find different ways to express or different ways to react to what's happening, because it's never the same.
Right.
You know?
And I've seen you in very different settings play,
Yeah.
right? Like from small jazz club, listening room situation to like an outdoor venue, you know, a huge stage, and each individual is like on stage pretty far apart. Like y'all are taking up the space, and, you know, in Caitlin Krisko and The Broadcast, right? Yeah. And y'all seem like comfortable in that regard too. And then also I saw you like, again, in that small jazz scene, also comfortable, but I just like, what is that like? Do you like for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're talking about like adaptability and like being able to like kind of plug into,
because you're talking about like whatever's resonating in that moment. Like, how are those things so different for you? So
there's a dichotomy. There's the band that I've been with the longest, and that's Caitlin Krisko and The Broadcast. And I think Michael and I, the drummer, just realized that we've been playing together 15 years.
Oh, wow.
And so that relationship is unlike any other relationship I have in music. And there's a like intuition, and there's a comfort that I have playing with him, even in really differing scenarios, you know? And so that's one aspect. The other is playing with a group I've never played with, or playing with a different iteration of different musicians. And that's totally different to me. And like, there's an excitement there in the newness and having to be open. And I think in both scenarios, I'm trying to be a listener first and reacting. With something you've done hundreds of times, you build up natural patterns that you go into. With something that's totally new, sometimes you're trying to, you know, apply some of those comfortable patterns onto it to give yourself some ease. Okay. And in other regards, I think you're trying to be open to that edge. Yeah. And open to, you know, finding new things. And really, it depends on the style of music that you're playing. I guess what I'm talking about right now is more like exploratory jazz. Yeah. But that even being said, when I play with even, you know, a singer-songwriter for the first time, there's the patterns you start with, but then I might not play that pattern the exact same way every chorus. I may be a little more fluid than a drum set player might be with that groove, because I'm a percussionist and I'm used to playing off of things, you know? Yeah.
And it's so many instruments that you have. And so that's what trips me out too, is because like when I think about the drums, or at least the way that I play, and a lot of drummers, I mean, I play drums and cymbals. Like that's pretty much it. I mean, I've got some shakers and I've got some other textural elements too, and sometimes I'll mess with those. But when you're up there, even on, you know, like maybe you had a similar setup that I've seen the two times that I've seen you now, but it's still the kind of like beautiful mind, like sifting through, okay, what is this calling for right now? And like, which element, and like, what do I go for? It's like such a different thing.
Yeah. I think it's sometimes it's easy to get lost in the amount of options. So I try to purposely narrow my options in a live setting. When I'm recording, I want to try all the sounds. Yeah. You know, if I'm doing a tambourine part, I want to like try 6 or 7 different tambourines. But when it's in that live moment, I'm really trying to limit the number of choices to make. Because there's like decision fatigue over an hour and a half set, you know? And that being said, there are a lot of options there. Right. But I'm trying to let, you know, the number of tools not overwhelm. Yeah. But be opening to exploring those limited tools in different ways. Yeah. There's a time playing at Little Jumbo where I was soloing on congas, and just started playing on the shells of the congas.
Yeah.
And it was only because I couldn't reach over it and grab something else at the other time. But like, you're always trying to think what's next, but also be present in the moment, you know?
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. Are there any techniques that you found most difficult in trying to grasp in the past, and maybe you've been able to push through? Or
coming back to the drum set, just in the past few months, I've been re-exploring the kit and getting back behind it. And there's things that I took. So when I transitioned from primarily drum kit to primarily hand percussion, there's things I took with me. Like, I play congas in the like non-traditional way. I use my right hand as my ride or my hi-hat.
Sure.
Because I'm used to that.
As opposed to the low end is how I always think about the right hand anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I'm out of my depth here.
Right. So like, rather than like, so I don't play cross-handed, but so I play with the conga set traditionally.
Okay.
The quinto on the left and the conga on the right. But my and traditional would be to kind of your heel toe, your ride is your left hand.
Okay.
And your slap and your tones are your right hand.
Okay.
I'm riding with my right, still playing open. I'm not, not crossing, but I'm doing it. It's kind of like goofy footed. And so I fought that for a while, and like,
can I ask, are you right-handed or left-handed?
I'm right-handed.
Okay.
I fought that for a while and taught myself to play traditionally. But it was limiting in the way I address the drum, and also in the way I have it set up. And so there was a percussionist, I forget who it was. It might have been who was I don't remember who it was, but emphasize. I had a one-on-one with him, and like we were working through some traditional stuff, and he's like, "Wait, are you playing the way you would naturally play?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "I could tell." And so he encouraged me to like go back to what felt natural to me. And so I went back to that, and I've embraced that ever since.
Nice.
But because I did spend like a couple years exploring that kind of left hand dominant way of playing, now going back to drum kit, I'm trying to like, I love it, explore that, like playing open with the left hand on the hi-hat, and even setting up, in different, non-traditional setups with the kit. Yeah. Because as I'm coming back to drum set, it's been a few years of like not a regular practice. So I have a chance to kind of reset the way I approach. Yeah. So I don't know if it's a block or an opportunity yet,
Oftentimes very similar things, right?
Yeah, totally.
It's a block is typically an opportunity for adaptation.
Right. And that's a really cool thing, that like the biggest blocks that I've had in music, like as soon as I confront them head on, it for instance, I'm really scared of heights. Okay. But my now wife, we were dating at the time, got me a skydiving trip for my birthday.
Knowing that you were.
Well, apparently I told her it was on my bucket list. Okay. It was like early courtship, and I was probably like, presenting a version of an aspirational version of myself. And so she surprised me with a skydiving trip, and like it was like I only knew like an hour before, so I didn't have enough time to like freak out. Yeah. And I had to do it. Yeah. So, and I did it, and that facing of the fears, it doesn't mean that I'm not scared of heights anymore, but I know that I can control what's up here and move past these barriers. And so that's just like a story that's like repeated many times musically over the years, where you hit that block, but you figure out a way over it. or through it,
right,
or under it, or however you need to get around it.
yeah,
And it doesn't mean it's not still there,
right,
but you learn about yourself through it.
yep,
And you learn that there's, things beyond.
yeah, and also like it doesn't have to be that struggle, and like you're talking about now, like with your teacher, that was like, this isn't the way you would naturally play, right? Like, why don't you just do it the other way? Because there's so many things in everything that we're taught that sometimes the decision like of why this is best practices is really just arbitrary.
Yep.
Like there are definitely some things that are like thought out and it makes sense and all that, but like the open hand drumming is a perfect example of like why
Totally.
because my 7-year-old playing drums now too, and when I was trying to teach her before I finally got her lessons, which is a good move, but she initially started playing open with the hi-hat and the snare, and I almost corrected her, and I was like, wait a second, I'm sitting here trying to rework this old brain to like try to play it more open, and she is just naturally going that way. So I was like, okay, so it's this end, and now I have to think about things and be more mindful.
Totally.
When I talk to my daughter, which is always a good opportunity to do when you're talking to kids or anyone, but especially to kids, like now I have to really think about how I view things and how she views things, and where we meet.
Teaching something is the best way to learn it.
Yeah.
Totally. And it totally challenges you, the way that you've learned things and the way you've accepted things to be.
Do you teach?
I have. I've done some. I've done some teaching on the drum, and I've done some teaching off the drum. Kind of the history of
nice.
West African music. Even
Okay.
I pulled myself out of that because I didn't feel like I'm the voice for it. But I have a deep appreciation for knowledge sharing and love passing things on. So yeah, I'm certainly not against that, but I'm also like, I'm not the teacher to be the one sharing some of this information.
Right. Yeah, if there are other voices that are more tied to that history and stuff, then that's always a good way to go.
Well, and I mean, it speaks to some of my blocks too, but like there are percussionists that like are now, like I always thought like the ultimate goal was to be the front of a project. And there's percussionists like that now, Pedrito Martinez, Weedy Brahma. Those are just two off the top of my head that are like up here, man. And they're, out front, and that's amazing. And like I just realized like I don't need that. And it's not that that's wrong in any way.
Right.
But I feel so fulfilled being the drummer's third and fourth arms, of being part of an organism that is a band, and those dynamics within the band and within the community, and those connective concepts that like I don't have to be the to your point, like I don't have to be the teacher with a student to share ideas and to be vulnerable and to like to put myself in a place of both learning and sharing, And then there's like there's some other projects, and like I'm really in those, trying to explore new instruments as well, like expand beyond like Afro-Cuban congas and West African djembe are like my two favorite instruments to play. There's a number of others that I play on a regular, but like trying to bring in some new instruments and like master them. Shakere, that's been really fun. It's a very three-dimensional instrument, and I try to take things from one percussive instrument and bring it over to another. So the way that you play a shakere is very like in all directions. It's not, up and down, side to side.
Right.
And so bringing that awareness to my body when I'm playing, when I'm back on my hand drums, and using if when you see me play, like I'm very like emotive, very like expressive percussionist.
Right.
And like
it translates.
It's fun to see that, I think, but it's also about the rhythm you're playing and like getting into these, you know, they're cycles. They're not linear rhythms. They're cyclical. And like thinking about that, like doing cyclical motions with my hands rather than linear, and like getting out of this like binary way of operating and thinking about things more complex in more complexity.
That's amazing.
Drums is dancing. Dancing is drums. You
right.
know?
Totally.
Like they're interlocked. Getting people moving, like that's always a goal of mine. Even if it's a ballad, even if it's, you know, something you wouldn't think of, body movement, you know?
Highest form of praise for a drummer, I think.
Totally. Yeah. If you can get somebody moving in their seat to a ballad, I mean, there's not anything harder, I don't think, as a drummer.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I really enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot, you know. Is there anything coming up that you wanted to publicize?
Caitlin Krisko The Broadcast, heading out on the road, be in UK in the next couple months.
Nice.
And then back doing a Southeast tour.
Okay.
Harvest Moon tour. And that should be really awesome. We'll be playing Asheville Salvage Station in November.
Perfect.
And so, yeah, look out for us.
Yeah.
Look out for me. I'm always open to exploring new projects and playing with new people.
Nice.
And playing with old people too.
Nice.